Hello everyone, welcome again to my channel. I'm Shiv and I hope you're all keeping safe and doing well. Today's topic is about a product called the StackShot, and what I wanted to show you is how to use it and what it is really good for. In those cases where your camera doesn't have the ability to do an internal stack and compile the stack for you, or even just do a stack where you can then bring the images into any other software and then do the stack, manual focusing rails are good. They're good if you are doing a few steps, or if you're doing steps for some known distances that are not necessarily going to require a lot of accuracy. But if you require a lot of accuracy, you want something mechanized, something that you do have a lot of control over, and that's what the StackShot really gives you. It's basically two parts with some connecting cables, and if you want, you can also get a battery pack so you can take it out in the field and use it outdoors. But I typically tend to use this more of an indoor product in studio to do close-up work, product photography work, and build stacks that require a lot of granularity. One of the things that I'm not going to be doing today is giving you all the specifications. You can go to the web and read that if you're interested. But the most important thing is, what is this product and how do you use it? So let me just switch over to a top view and explain to you the components. What I have in front of me here is the main StackShot, which is the device that has two rails. These are smooth rails. There's no gradation or any kind of markings on this. There's a central worm gear that basically drives this platform on which you mount your camera. The unit itself is sitting on another ball head, just so that I can level it as needed, which is then mounted to a Platypod Max, just to provide some tabletop setup. The next piece that comes as a part of the StackShot is the controller, which you see right here. Let me just pick it up and see if I can bring it a little bit more into focus. So this is where the controller is. It has two buttons on this side, which is the up and down buttons, a select button, a configuration button, and a forward and back button, which allows the unit to move forward and back, which on this rail. The nice thing about this is that it is driven by a very precise stepper motor. Let me give you a view of that. This here is really the stepper motor, and you can go into literally not just millimeters and tenths of millimeters, but you can actually move this in microns if you so want to. But for the system that we've got set up over here and for what we're trying to do, you don't need that level of granularity. We have pretty decent depth of field, and the amount of magnification that we're using is fairly small, so that level of granularity is not going to be required. So the controller connects to the StackShot rail system via a cable that provides all of the motion control. That comes from the StackShot to the linear motor, or actually the stepper motor of the StackShot worm drive. We have a second cable from the controller that goes to the remote control port of your camera. StackShot provides multiple cables of various configurations based upon the type of camera that you're using. And then finally, we have one third cable, which is the cable that supplies power. You get an AC adapter with it. You can incrementally buy batteries and use those batteries out in the field. But in the most part, 3 cables and 2 units pack up nicely, but yet I find it to be a little on the heavy side to carry around in the field. Where needed, you can definitely do that, but otherwise for studio work, this is perfect. Now, I have modified this slightly. I do have a Really Right Stuff quick release plate on top, which allows me to easily mount my camera when I need to. So I'm going to be using a Panasonic Lumix G9, which I will now mount on the rail system. And what we're going to basically do with this is set it up to give you an overview and demonstrate how we do a stack and what the calculations are required to do a proper stack. The first thing that we need to do is to get this camera on and connected. So let me get that so I can show you what the camera sees. All right, so you're now seeing the screen of the Panasonic G9. Once again, the G9 is mounted to a 45mm Panasonic Leica macro lens. We have our settings for this system set up to be 6400 ISO, and we've got the aperture at f2.8. And that's the widest open that this lens will go in. So we have the Panasonic G9 mounted to the StackShot with the Panasonic Lumix So the configuration is the Panasonic Lumix G9 with the Leica 45mm macro lens. And what I'm going to do is set this up to focus on this little toy car here, and then we will go through doing a few calculations and setting the steps and distances required to take a good close-up image. So the first thing we need to do is to raise up this vehicle, and I do that with a product called a lab. It's a lab jack, and the jack actually is a scissored mechanism which allows me to raise and lower the unit as needed. So I can actually lift it up a little bit more, and there we have it. So now the next thing to do is to make sure that we have a decent composition, and that our arrangement is such that no matter where I focus, if I focus on the very front, which is here, to the very back, which is about here, the focus breathing that typically lenses have is not going to end up with a situation where the object goes out of frame, and we don't want that to happen. So we want enough room around to make sure that the object stays in frame while we're doing our stack. So once again, let's just focus in on the front of the vehicle. All right, we have now the setup done, and now we need to take a few measurements. The measurements that we're going to take is how far is the front of the car from the sensor, and that's going to give us our first measurement that we need to use when we get to photo pills for the software calculations of depth of field. So we have approximately 30, and then if I do So we have about 32 millimeters, 32 centimeters from the sensor, from right here, the sensor mark, to the front end of the car. The next measurement that we need to take is what is the depth that we're going to be using. So from here to back there is what we can see, and how far is that. And as in pretty well looking at it from on the scale, we have about 5 centimeters or 50 millimeters of distance from the front to the back. And those are the figures that we'll be using to do the calculation and what kind of settings we want. Now the next functions that we need to make sure is that we get some decent light on our object. So let's turn some lights on. And what I'm using are 2 Lytra Pros, each one of them mounted to a Platypod gooseneck on top of an Ultra. There's an Ultra here and an Ultra here. So the 2 Ultras, and then I have a third Lytra Pro using a softbox. And the softbox gives me some very nice soft light on top. And that is on a double gooseneck sitting on top of a Platypod Max. So now with this lighting setup, and the distances that we've calculated, let's go to the software and figure out how much depth of field we have and how many steps we're going to need to move the system. Now that we have everything set up, the next thing we've got to do is to find out how many steps we're going to need based upon the distance or the depth of field that the calculator is going to tell us. So what we're going to do is I'm going to switch over and show you this screen from PhotoPills. I'm using the macro depth of field calculator, and we're just going to enter all the details about the camera that we're using, the distance from the camera sensor to the front of the subject that we're photographing, and the aperture that we're using. And this is the PhotoPills macro depth of field calculator. So the first thing we need to do is to tell it what camera we're using. And we're using a GH4 style camera. We are using the 45 millimeter Leica macro lens. Our aperture is f2.8. And I'm not going to worry about the next 2 items. We can go into details about that later. Our focusing distance is about 32 centimeters from the sensor to the front of the car, and I'm not using any extension tubes. That basically tells me that my depth of field is 2.46 millimeters. And it is saying my safe step size for stacking using a 20% overlap would be 1.97 millimeters, approximately 2 millimeters. If we do a 2 millimeter step, that's not too bad. Now, since the distance from the front of the car to the back of the car is 5 centimeters, we take 5 and divide it by 2, and that will basically give us 25 steps that we need to have in order to focus stack from the beginning point to the end point with a depth of field of 2.46, close to 2.5 millimeters, and still have a sufficient overlap in between. Now that we have the number of steps required, so we've got the distance from the camera to the subject, we have the distance from the front of the subject to the back of the subject, we've calculated the number of steps required based upon the depth of field and the 20% overlap that the software told us to use. What we're going to do now is to set the StackShot to the front and end points and start the program. So with that, let's go to the view of. All right, we've got the camera now feeding so you can see what I'm doing. And let's just go to the So we now have the highlight pretty much on the front headlamp of the vehicle, and we're going to set that as the start point. And now we're going to go to the very back, the back of the vehicle. And we set the end point of where it's going to stop. All right, we've got 25 steps. We've got the front and the end point. When I start the process, the rail is going to first move all the way back to focus on the tip of the car, the front tip of the car where the headlamp is, and then start taking images sequentially till it gets to the tail. I'm going to let it move forward all the way to the end. I won't bore you through all the 25 steps. So we're now approaching the tail end of the sequence, and as you can see, the rail has moved pretty much all the way forward. That was the last image that's captured, and the unit automatically moves back to the start point. Now, if you want, you can restart this to take a second set just in case you feel something may have gone wrong, but hopefully none of that has happened. And now we can take the card out of the camera, bring it into the computer, and I'll show you a quick Helicon stack of this image. Okay, here's the view of my computer screen. I'm going to open up the card that I've just inserted, and let's just select all the images. And I did this using JPEG just to make sure that we can get a quick demonstration. I'm going to take these images and move it to a folder on my desktop. That way it'll be quicker. And let's open Helicon Focus. I'm going to take all of the images and drag them all right. We have all of our images in Helicon Focus. I know I have a little bit of a white balance issue, but we can resolve that later. The key here is to be able to get these stacked. So there are 25 images as we have taken, and this is the image which is the last one. As you can see, the tail is sharp, and this is the first image where the headlamp is sharp. And what I typically do in situations like this, I use the rendering method B for most of my work. Rendering method C I will use if I have a situation where I know that there is a lot of overlapping material in the object that I'm photographing. And that typically is a situation like when you have flowers with a lot of petals which overlap. Then I will tend to use that as my method of rendering. So with nothing else wrong, hopefully, over here, not having to look at individual images, let's just do a quick render and see what we get as the final image. Now, if you were using raw files, clearly this would take considerably more time, but either way, you get an idea of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So here is the image that has now fully been rendered, and I'm going to save it into the same place as I have the original images on my desktop, and I can close down Helicon Focus and do a preview of the image that was saved as the final. And there we have it. I mean, if we want to do some more work in Photoshop and go and change and adjust the colors, etc., we can do that. But you know, that's something that we can really cover in a future topic. So I hope you found that kind of useful. If you did, please do give me a thumbs up. And once again, if you'd like to, and I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. And when you do subscribe, hit that notification icon, and that way you'll be notified of all future episodes that are published. The next one that I want to do is I want to talk about filters. There's been a number of requests to discuss various types of filters, how to use them, and what they're good for. So I'll try and cover as many of the various types of filters that are available over there. And in the meantime, please do look after yourselves, take care, and I will see you the next time. Bye-bye for now.